On New Year's Eve 1977, U.S. President Jimmy Carter raised a glass in Tehran and delivered a toast to the Shah of Iran, calling his country an island of stability in one of the more troubled areas of the world. Within days of that speech, the first sparks of mass protest ignited in the streets of Qom. Within a year, the monarch Carter was toasting would be forced to flee his own country. This chart tracks Iran's national wealth alongside its military spending. Looking at these numbers, Carter's confidence made sense. Following the 1973 oil shock, Iran's petroleum revenues quadrupled. The Shah immediately poured billions of those petrodollars into American-made fighter jets, tanks, and destroyers, building one of the most formidable armies on the planet. Armed with endless cash and absolute authority, the Shah launched an aggressive modernization campaign to force his ancient country into the 20th century. But the policies designed to cement his status as an unassailable ruler were actively digging the grave of his monarchy. Gross domestic product and imported military hardware are easy to measure, but they are blinding metrics. They create a facade of national strength that completely hides the fracturing of a country's cultural and social fabric. The Shah called his modernization program the White Revolution. Launched in 1963, it was a top-down mandate meant to rapidly industrialize the economy, break up traditional land monopolies, and impose secular education. The centerpiece was land reform, intended to empower rural peasants by breaking up vast estates. In practice, millions of tenant farmers were handed parcels of land too small to survive on, without the credit or modern machinery required to compete. Bankrupt and displaced, farmers poured into the cities. Tehran's population exploded from 500,000 to nearly 5 million. The infrastructure simply collapsed. New migrants built sprawling concrete slums on the edges of Tehran, living without electricity or running water. Every day, these displaced families were confronted by the immense wealth of the petro elite. They watched foreign luxury cars speed past women washing clothes in street gutters, and lived alongside 50,000 newly arrived foreign workers who were thriving in the boom economy. When a government forces aggressive economic shifts but completely fails to build structural safety nets, it doesn't create a modern middle class. It creates an alienated, volatile underclass with nothing left to lose. For the rural poor migrating to the capital city, the economic ruin was matched by severe cultural shock. They were traditional, devout Muslims, thrust into a city dominated by secular laws, Western advertising, and a cosmopolitan elite viewing their religious values with contempt. Anyone attempting to politically organize this frustration faced SAVAK, the Shah's brutal secret police. Backed by the CIA, SAVAK systematically crushed all secular opposition, utilizing torture and imprisonment to eliminate democratic avenues for dissent. With political parties outlawed and labor unions broken, the only social networks capable of surviving the repression were the ones the state couldn't entirely shut down: the ancient merchant bazaars and the Shiite mosques. This vacuum allowed an exiled cleric living in neighboring Iraq to become the voice of the resistance. Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini lived an aesthetic lifestyle that sought in stark, deliberate contrast to the Shah's diamond-studded excesses. Khomeini weaponized the theology of Shiite Islam. He explicitly mapped the Shah's corruption onto the Battle of Karbala, the foundational story of Shiite martyrdom, framing the monarch as an un-Islamic tyrant violently opposing the will of God. By translating extreme economic inequality into a narrative of religious victimhood, Khomeini offered the urban poor something far more powerful than a political manifesto. He transformed their daily frustration into a sacred, uncompromisable duty. The tension finally snapped in January 1978. The regime planted a newspaper article smearing Khomeini, which immediately sparked outrage in the holy city of Qom. Police fired into the crowds, killing several religious students. In Shiite tradition, the passing of a loved one is followed by Arba'in, a mourning period lasting 40 days and concluding with a memorial gathering. This diagram illustrates how a religious tradition became the mechanical engine of the revolution. The deaths in Qom triggered a 40-day mourning period. 40 days later, people gathered in larger numbers, leading to clashes with the military and more deaths. Those new deaths triggered another 40-day cycle, creating an escalating, self-sustaining loop of violence. By August, the country reached a boiling point in the city of Abadan. 4 men barred the doors of the Cinema Rex, poured gasoline in the lobby, and lit a match. Nearly 500 people burned to death inside. Today, historians largely agree the arson was the work of Islamic militants, targeting a symbol of Western culture. But in the summer of 1978, the Iranian public universally blamed SAVAK, accusing the secret police of staging the fire to frame the opposition. Once an authoritarian regime entirely depletes its public trust, the truth of a specific event stops mattering. Even tragedies completely outside the government's control become undeniable fuel for its destruction. By the fall, the protests evolved into massive labor strikes that targeted the state's lifeblood, completely paralyzing the oil fields and stripping the regime of its revenue. Stripped of cash and facing millions of citizens refusing to leave the streets, the military began to buckle. In January 1979, the cancer-stricken Shah finally boarded a plane and fled Iran, his monarchy collapsing behind him. Just 2 weeks later, Ayatollah Khomeini returned from exile. He was met in Tehran by millions of supporters, showcasing a staggering feat of grassroots religious mobilization. Shortly after, a national referendum officially abolished thousands of years of Persian monarchy, replacing it with the world's first modern theocratic state, the Islamic Republic of Iran. The geopolitical shockwaves were immediate. The United States lost its most heavily armed Middle Eastern ally, and global politics entered a period defined by the aggressive rise of political Islam. The fall of the Shah provides a brutal historical lesson. Imposing top-down economic progress without cultural resonance and trying to enforce that progress through sheer brutality doesn't protect a regime. It only builds the guillotine eventually used to end it.